Welcome to A Growing Concern. We've got some beautiful pictures here from that have been taken by the folks at Bark, and we have the Forest Watch coordinator for Bark, Michael. He's been with them for a while now, and he's done a good job. And we're going to talk a little bit about Bark for the first half an hour. And I haven't heard from my second guest for the second half an hour, but I'm going to have faith that they're going to be here. We're going to talk a little bit about something called Juneteenth. And if you don't know about it, then it's something that you might want to hear about. Welcome to the program, Michael.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right.
It worked out.
Yeah, it did. It was just slammed together at the last minute here.
That's right.
Sometimes that always works out for the best.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk a little bit about Bark itself and some of the events that are coming up later on. But the main reason I've got a hold of Michael, and actually got a hold of him through Karen Coulter, that there was a press release put out yesterday having to do with relationship of, I guess you could say, the people and the Forest Service.
Yeah.
And what was that all about anyway?
Well, so yeah, that's right. Karen got in touch with me to come on the show and talk about this press release that she released yesterday, and it's in response to a sign-on letter that around 15 groups signed on to, 15 conservation groups.
Here in just Portland?
So these are groups, Bark, one of the groups, that's the group that I represent, Blue Mountains Biodiversity Project, which is Karen Coulter's group, and then right around 14 or 15 other groups in Oregon, Montana, Idaho, and Washington. So really kind of all over the West these groups came from to sign on to this letter. And just to give folks a little bit maybe of a background about, I know Bark's been on the show before, but for folks...
We've never talked much about it, just tangentially, we never talked about this.
Yeah. So what Bark is, Bark's a nonprofit. We've been around for a little over 15 years, and our goal, our mission is to protect and restore ecosystems within Mount Hood National Forest. And so Mount Hood National Forest it's a national forest. It's federally managed land by the Forest Service under the Department of Agriculture. And it's also something we say it's a public land. It's considered public land. And so what that means is its management is paid for by tax dollars, by our tax money. And it's also meant to be managed in a way that reflects the public's values, which is something that we're going to talk about tonight. But so Bark monitors all the timber sales and other projects proposed on Mount Hood National Forest, and when there's decisions being made by the Forest Service, we articulate a voice that's rooted in putting ecosystems and healthy communities before extractive industries. And Karen Coulter, with the Blue Mountains Biodiversity Project, there we go, does similar work in Eastern Oregon, and she looks at, instead of just one national forest, she looks at the Ochiko, the Malheur, the Deschutes, and the Umatilla National Forest. So she's really got her work cut out for her out there.
The whole northern, central to the northern part of the state, and Deschutes is just west of Bend. So it's there all the way to the border then.
Yeah, it's a huge area that she looks at. And so that's our role in kind of, engaging the public with federal lands management and timber sales. We also get people out to the woods and educate them about things that are happening in their backyard. So that's sort of what we do. And this letter that a whole bunch of Forest Watch groups signed on to addresses sort of this trend that is basically the Forest Service using what they call collaborative groups to plan controversial timber sales. And so what a collaborative group is on paper, or what it's meant to be, is basically it's a group of diverse interests, so all the way from the timber industry and timber companies to the other side of the spectrum, conservation groups like Bark and Blue Mountains Biodiversity Project. And those groups get together, and the idea is that they talk things out when timber sales are being proposed and try to find common ground in terms of what the Forest Service is proposing. And then with that common ground, they provide recommendations to the Forest Service on their timber sale program. And so this was something the Forest Service, a little over 10 years ago, thought up as a way to avoid so many litigations and appeals and objections and and just a way to better engage the public. So it started off as, you know, a pretty sound idea. You know, get everyone at the table, people that don't usually talk to each other so much.
But who comes onto the table? I mean, you got U.S. Forest Service on one side and environmental groups on the other, and who is in between there?
So in between, there's a lot of groups that are in between, and you know, this is one thing I'll talk about, how you know, that spectrum is becoming a little bit more skewed these days towards the timber interests. And so we have like hunting groups, we have recreation groups sometimes, and all types of recreation, so everything from OHVs to hiking groups typically. And then we have, you know, county commissioners and, you know, the counties who, you know, are invested in the timber sale program because that's where many places they get a lot of their revenue. Watershed councils, so a lot of these groups that are, you know, engaged with public lands are you know, supposed to be at the table.
It's just by invitation, or can anybody join?
It depends on the group. Some groups you have to go through a process where you kind of have to prove that you're a stakeholder and go through different criteria. And then other groups, anyone can show up, and you can be an at-large member, so you can be a local resident.
Sure. Well, if you're drinking the water, you're a stakeholder.
That's right. Yeah, that's true.
I would think.
But so this trend that we're seeing lately with these groups basically is, you know, the collaborative groups sound great on paper, but what we're seeing lately is that the decisions that are coming out of these collaborative groups are not being very reflective or considerate of the conservation community's values. And so there's a lot of reasons for this, and a lot of trends that we've been seeing, and one of them, you know, like I kind of alluded to, is that these groups are becoming less and less diverse. So like I said, more skewed towards timber interests. They're also being you know, tasked with having to engage with more and more controversial timber sales, especially in places like Eastern Oregon, for sure. So
it doesn't have the weight of the population that.
Right. Yeah, that's true. To sort of skew it the other direction, it's kind of just Karen and a few other folks out there. So that's a huge challenge.
She must be real popular with the Forest Service.
I think she's got some friends out there. It's you know, she's been out there for a while.
She has. She's been on the program a couple times.
Yeah, that's true. And so, you know, that's an issue. The fact that the timber sales, especially out in Eastern Oregon, are becoming more and more ecologically destructive in terms of the projects that the collaboratives are engaging with, and more like large scale. It makes it really hard for conservation groups to basically have a starting point to be able to engage with that, because they're already compromising so much. You know, it's never a question of whether or not this big timber sale should happen. It's kind of like how. So that makes it really hard. And then a big thing is the process of the decision making in the groups has become less and less emphasis towards finding common ground. And you know, I can talk a bit more about that in a second, but the other really funny thing that we're seeing a lot out here on the west side is that it seems like even when these collaborative groups get together and work really hard to come up with some sort of collective decision where everyone at the table is represented, the Forest Service in many cases doesn't seem very interested in pursuing what the group comes up with if it's different than what the Forest Service wants to do in the first place, which, you know, is really discouraging as a participant in one of these groups.
So I imagine a lot of people or groups or whatever have just probably dropped out of it then.
Yeah, that's true. I know
that might be what they want.
Yeah, there's a large conservation group that dropped out of a Mount Hood collaborative group recently because there was an instance where, you know, there was the timber folks who were at the table who really wanted more logging and aggressive logging in some areas, and then you know, Bark and Oregon Wild, we were sort of like, you know, we'll be okay with some logging in places that maybe we wouldn't necessarily really want it to be there, but the only way that we're ever going to sign on to this is if the Forest Service promises that they'll reduce the amount of road mileage and road impacts in these areas. And so the group kind of got together and hashed that out, and then when the scoping letter came out with what the Forest Service actually wanted to do, it included all the aggressive logging, but none of the conservation interests were represented, and so
the collaborative group isn't binding at all then.
in that case, it
it's
sure
supposed to
didn't
be.
seem like it. Yeah, and there's been other instances as well where the collaborative groups have worked hard to look at some of the more controversial parts of the timber sale and have recommended dropping certain parts of that. And the Forest Service has said, okay, we'll drop these few units. This happened in a timber sale called the Lava Timber Sale that Bark was engaged with. And so the Forest Service was like, okay, we'll drop those units. And then literally a few months later, they proposed another timber sale right next to it. And those units were part of that one. And so they just moved the units from one timber sale to another.
Shell game.
Yeah.
It seemed to me from the very beginning, since I've been on the board since the beginning, that it was just kind of a Trojan horse, this whole collaborative process. And that was just my suspicion, because I'm pretty suspicious of governments, especially our government when it comes to resource extraction, because they're so like this with, the timber industry or the cattle industry or the mining industry. They're right in there. They're almost a part of the government. And
Right.
I was very suspicious, and it seems like it's getting to that more obvious all the time.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we've really seen, and other groups on this sign-on letter have seen that the Forest Service many times is using these groups kind of as leverage or as a tool
Against each other, maybe to some degree.
and specifically against groups that challenge their projects. It's really hard these days for a group to challenge a timber sale that's gone through this collaborative process, because the Forest Service will say, well, you have problems with this timber sale. We did this collaborative process. This collaborative group met. We discussed this. You kind of had your chance to get your voice heard. But when we don't see our voices being reflected in the decisions, it really begs the question of whether or not this process is working out all that well.
I think I remember from psychology or something. You can't predict what an individual will do, but you can predict groups. And
Yeah, the
you
group
can
think is
manipulate
huge.
groups a lot more than you can individuals.
Yeah, that's right. And so, I mentioned some of the process, like the decision-making process in the groups, is really difficult for conservation groups, especially because, like I mentioned, we're becoming outnumbered in these groups in many cases. And the way that these decisions are being made, it many times is like by majority rule. And so, when we're outnumbered and there's very high pressure within the group to get the cutout and provide more timber, it's really hard for that process to work. And
We need to switch that camera in there. There you go.
There we go.
So yeah, and we're into the program almost 14 minutes already. So what you're all saying makes a lot of sense, and it's a typical bureaucratic shuffle. And what exactly are you asking for with this?
Oh well, with this letter, we really we want to get this information out there for folks to know, so basically raise awareness about it at this point. And I know that a lot of these groups are going to get together and talk about next steps, but really there hasn't been much talk even within and amongst the conservation community about this situation that is really scary, and there's some really scary stuff happening now where there's actually even a bill proposed to Congress recently that would make it so if an environmental group were to litigate on a project that went through the collaborative process, they would have to pay forward all the Forest Service's legal fees. And so, I don't think that bill will pass, but it does reflect this climate that's very kind of it doesn't serve environmental groups, and so we really want to make that process known and exposed for what it is. And I know a lot of these groups who sign on to this letter are going to be backing out of their collaborative groups and using this letter as basically a reasoning why, and showing force in numbers, and putting that forth to the Forest Service to take as they will. And we hope to use this letter and the press release as leverage against any kind of demonization that comes towards environmental groups in the future who are challenging timber sales
Sure.
that go through this process.
Right. Well, not that they're probably not doing what they want to do anyway, but it seems to me that they put this collaborative situation in there, and then down the road they just slowly make it so it's untenable for people to join, and when they quit, and they back off, like you say, then the Forest Service can just say, well, we tried that, and
Right.
the public doesn't either want to join in with us, or they don't want to get along with one another. So we'll just continue doing what we've always done. Is that a possibility?
Well, so those are some of the questions that I know Bark is grappling with now. We've backed out of one of the collaborative groups that we're engaged with. So right now we're part of one collaborative group, mostly in the Clackamas, and then we backed out of one. We still sometimes attend the field trips and stuff in Hood River, and then we're looking into one that's just starting up now and sort of assessing our role in that. But yeah, we're definitely asking ourselves these questions internally about whether or not this is a tactic we want to engage with, or if we want to back out fully.
Well, so are these collaborative groups, are they set up around specific timber sales? So they've already established a timber sale they want, and then they bring folks in to talk about
Right, that's
the
right.
dynamic, or
Yeah.
the different parts of it.
Yeah, many of them aren't like long-term collaborative groups. Lots of times they form specifically to talk about individual timber sales, which makes it really hard to build long-term relationships within the group and things like that. And one other thing I'll say about the process within the groups, I mentioned lots of times it's majority rule. And so when an environmental group has problems with a timber sale and they can't sign on to the majority rule, oftentimes the process is that they have to submit a minority letter kind of as a formality. And then at that point, the only way that a conservation group can fight a timber sale is by using their legal tools. And at that point, they become demonized in the group for going against what was supposedly a consensus decision, but really wasn't. And so those are the types of situations we get into that make it really hard for us to stay engaged with these groups.
Yeah, it sounds to me like it was set up in order, at least out on the surface, to bring different parts of the community together. But it looks like in some ways it's being maneuvered in such a way that the different groups are bouncing off each other rather than overlapping and finding their common goals.
Right, and I think that's the takeaway from this is the common goals among all participants aren't being reached, and so I think there really needs to be a rethinking of this process, and I hope that this press release and this letter can be a start to get that conversation going.
So it's just basically a primer, so to speak. You're priming the pump or whatever.
Yep. So more to come
to get some folks interested in what's going on. That's basically why we brought this particular issue up, as folks out there can before we move on to the second part of what we want to talk about, can folks viewing, if they're interested, I imagine they can call Bark. Is there anything on Bark's website having to do with this collaborative?
Yeah, I think we'll probably post this press release up on our website so folks can learn more, and definitely for people that are interested in getting involved with forest politics and timber sales and bark. We have a lot of events coming up to engage people and teach people. Yeah. This might be for folks just starting out. Getting involved in the collaborative group issue might be a little much at first. But if I know one thing people can do is contact your representative, reference this letter, and so if folks are interested in doing that, definitely call the Bark office, and we can get you in touch with how to do that. And so, and you can visit our website, which is www.bark-out.org.
And we have graphics for that too, and as well as a Facebook page.
Yep, and we have a Facebook page, which is just facebook.com/barkout. Yep, there it is. And and I also encourage folks to look into what Blue Mountains Biodiversity Project is up to as well. And the work that they're doing out in Eastern Oregon. Karen Coulter is the director of the co-director with Paula Hood of that organization, and they're out in Eastern Oregon right now, out on the ground field checking timber sales and need help. So if folks are interested in volunteering for them, their phone number's up there. It's 541-385-9167.
And they do great work over there. Where Bark's lucky, you folks or we or however, actually it's the whole community is focused through Bark. You've got Mount Hood National Forest, whereas like you say, she's got four
national forests.
National forests with who knows how many timber sales. And there's less rain over there, so things don't recover as quickly.
Yeah,
so I imagine that the planted trees have more of a trouble surviving, especially when the drought comes along.
Yeah, there's a lot of changes going on in some of the dry forests now, so it's really important to engage with the science and make good decisions in terms of what folks are doing out there. And Karen is running that project on a much tighter budget than Bark with a lot less help, so you can learn a lot from going out and hanging out in Eastern Oregon with those folks. So I encourage people to do that if they get a chance.
Wait till it cools off a bit.
Yeah.
But speaking of that, if folks wanted to get to learn what it is you're doing, isn't there some kind of camp out coming up?
Yeah, there's actually a few events that I'll mention. One of them is the camp out. So we're having a camp out up at the Palali Cooper timber sale. And so that's at the end of this, actually next weekend, so starting Friday the 26th all the way to Monday the 29th.
Just when the heat wave's hitting.
Yeah, it's going to be hot, but I think it'll be a little bit cooler up in the forest. We'll be at some higher elevation, and we'll stay cool somehow.
So it's going to be Friday through Monday then?
Friday through Monday, and so folks can come and join us for however, whatever length of time that you want. We've got information on our website about how to meet us out there and what's expected, what to bring, and all that. And I mean the Bark campouts are really like the most fun thing that we do all year. So we'll have daily trainings and workshops on how to ground truth timber sales, so how to go out and walk timber sales and collect information. We'll have guided hikes, group activities. Maybe we'll even do a little bit of swimming, I hope. So I'm really looking forward to that. And folks, you can check the website and get all the details on that event.
You mentioned, I'm trying to think, there's not really any lakes around up there, so you're going to have to go find one somewhere.
Yeah, there's Lawrence Lake is probably the closest lake.
Right, or you could head down to Trillium, a little ways away, and Clear Lake.
I think there's some swimming spots on the East Fork of the Hood River. Hopefully we can find some.
Yeah, that river drops pretty fast down to the gorge. So I was wondering if there'd be any.
Yeah, probably even quicker
pools
this year.
Yeah. So, well, all right. There's a lot of good information here, and before we move along, hopefully we'll find that if the folks that are supposed to do the second half, we'll see when they get here and we'll know. And if not, we can just, leisurely continue the conversation here. And Bark has been in nonprofit and been doing the Bark for Mount Hood show out in Gresham since I think April of '99.
Yeah, that's right.
So it's like we're going on a little over 16 years, and that whole time it's been the focus on the Mount Hood National Forest. And at one time there was like 50 active timber sale planning, not actually logging 50 of them. And is that still somewhat the case?
Well, so it's a little bit different now. Whereas before there was a lot more timber sales. That's for sure. And some of them are really big, but some of them are really small. And so these days what we're looking at is sales projects that are a lot larger in scale. So, upwards of thousands of acres as opposed to hundreds of acres.
Like
and they're getting bigger and bigger. Yeah. And so, there's a timber sale called right now they're calling it the Rocky Timber Sale that's out in the Barlow district on the east side. And they're talking about that being something like 8,000 acres, which is biggest timber sale we've engaged with for a while.
Right, but it's not 8,000 acres in one chunk, though.
Not in one chunk. Yeah, that's true, and that's an important thing to recognize.
In some ways, that's even worse.
Yeah, so lots of times, like with the Jazz timber sale and with a lot of these other timber sales that are thousands of acres, they break them up into these little units and spread them across sometimes multiple watersheds, which makes the work of going out and field checking them really challenging, which is why we need help.
Right, and it's more, since it's scattered out over a larger area, in some ways the fragmentation is even worse too, because in between those are past timber sales.
Yeah, that's right. We see that almost every time a new timber sale comes out. We're like looking at that area and thinking, we've been there before. Oh yeah, there was a timber sale unit that was right next to this area that they want to log now. So yeah, they definitely stretch things out.
Yeah, as I remember, if a timber sale, once it reaches 6 feet, they consider that it's been it's been recovered, and so they don't have to count that as a cumulative effect.
Right.
And there's a lot of little tricks that they use, and I hate to consistently be using the word they, but when we use the word they, basically we're talking the Forest Service.
Right.
And that's the U.S. Forest Service. And Mount Hood National Forest is just one of many national forests. And when you were talking about the collaborative a little while ago, I was thinking, well, you got 14 groups that are signing on to this letter, but there isn't 14 groups that are dealing with your interfacing with the Forest Service here, just like Bark isn't interfacing with the Forest Service in Idaho or Montana.
Yeah.
So each one of those locations are pretty much separately working on their own then.
Yeah, you zoom it out, and it becomes a pretty big area that these groups are collectively working on, which is why it's important, for us to communicate with one another and try to collaborate, not in the sense of the collaborative groups maybe, but try to work together on some of these bigger issues that are, across multiple national forests. Share information and form coalitions, I think, is something that we're going to be doing a lot more of in the coming years. As an organization, Bark is thinking of forming new coalitions with other environmental groups and other forests, and I'm really excited to have that happen. So.
Sure. Well, it might be jumping the gun a little bit, but there's something called the urban forests, which are forests that have within 50 miles of, say, a population of 1 million people or something like that.
Yeah, that's true.
And there's a lot of those all over the country, and a lot of times those particular ones, even if they're not 50 miles or further away, they may be drawing people from a great distance because there's nothing else nearby. And so that to me, that urban national forest is this is just starting to be talked about now. But to me, that's a very important thing, because as we become less and less wilderness, we find that there's less and less understanding of how important it is, because people people don't go out there just for quiet recreation. And that's what I think that I use national forests and wilderness and getting out into the woods is for quiet recreation.
Right. Well, and you're not alone. The Forest Service has been looking a lot lately about the demographics of people that use national forests and the amount of revenue that comes into the national forest, and they're finding that the majority of it is not from supporting the extractive programs that they've supported for so long. It's from things like quiet recreation and people visiting the forest for other reasons that maybe they were 25, 30 years ago. There's really sort of a shift in the way that people view our public lands. And so something that we're hoping to do in terms of working together with other groups is pushing the Forest Service to recognize that and to manage those lands accordingly. In terms of the way that they budget their programs and things like that, and supporting the revenue base that exists there, while also recognizing that population centers are growing. There's more pressure on forests that are nearby cities. So yeah, that's part of the bigger picture conversations we're having.
It seemed to me that I'd never really thought about it in those terms, but folks that are going up there for quiet recreation or for recreation in general, they're going to stop and buy worms, they're going to stop and buy lures, they're going to stop and buy coffee, they're going to buy food for a few days if they go camping. They're going out and buying tents and packs and all these different things. Yep. It's a big, wider, good footprint compared to someone that the extraction industries would seem like they're much narrower.
Yeah, and just people going out into the forest and into nature and enjoying it for its inherent value is something that's becoming more and more popular, and Bark really supports that, because that's the kind of connection that we really like to foster on our public lands. Is we like to teach people about the ecology and how things work, and get people attached to places that they love going to and just enjoying for just being there.
Which brings us around to the next weekend. I mean, when folks, I should say, go to the camp out, they're going to learn a lot about Palali Cooper, possibly.
Right.
But you're going to also be talking about, more of a broader ecological relationship to the national forest.
Yeah, definitely. And one thing that I hope we can do, I think we will do when we're up there, they just opened the road that goes up to the Cloud Cap Inn, Tilly Jane, and so we're hoping to go up there and be able to walk around in some of the areas that the Gnarl Ridge fire
Just was thinking
happened.
you were going to say that, yeah.
Yeah, and so we were up there just a couple days ago, and it's really beautiful how everything's coming back and how much habitat was created by forest fire, and that's something we really like to educate people about a lot, is the ecological role and importance of forest fires in ecosystems. And so we're going to be in the perfect place to be able to do that.
I was on a couple of those hikes. One of them wore me out, but aside from that, it was you could go through 30-40 feet of 5 foot tall, 4 foot tall bear grass. And I don't know if that's blooming yet. It's early yet, but it's an early season.
Yeah, it's blooming, and some of it is even done blooming. It's so early.
Because usually it's around July.
Yeah.
And you might have large swaths of lupin, and it was just, I couldn't believe it. It was just gorgeous. All that ash falling down. It's just fertilizer.
Yeah, I mean, ecosystems that people always say that they're recovering from forest fire, but really the forest recovers from forest fires coming through, and what you see after a forest fire is the second most diverse forest ecosystem, second only to old growth forest. So it's a really amazing thing to witness when you can do it. So encourage folks to go and stomp around in a burn and see how it makes you feel. I bet it'll make you feel pretty good.
I bet so. And I know 3 years ago, maybe 2, 3, there was Gnarl Ridge and there was Dollar Lake. But the Gnarl Ridge, I remember when we went up there, there was already, I think within a year, there was already little baby fir trees coming up. Mm-hmm. Might have been pine, but I think it was fir. So, it was already recovering. You expect the shrubs and the annual or perennial herbaceous plants to come back, but the trees were coming back already.
Yeah, they come back quick. I mean, a lot of those tree species, fire has shaped their lifestyles and their life cycles, and so, a forest fire doesn't create the moonscape type situation that a lot of people assume it does. Mm-hmm. And I'll say one thing. If folks are interested in learning more about,
a good example of the moonscape.
Yeah, that's another that's an unnatural disturbance. That's the type of disturbance that forests haven't figured out how to adapt to just quite yet.
Not yet.
But yeah, if folks are interested in learning more about forest ecology and want to get sort of a primer, there's another event that Bark is hosting just 2 days before the campout, which is Dr. Trygve Steen, who I believe you filmed.
I taped him once. I'm going to try to do that again because I think he's got a different theme on this one that he did the last time.
The last time I saw him do his presentation, he tied in climate change into the talk in a way that was really cool. But he's been doing forest education and advocacy for a really long time, and has got a presentation that he gives it's beautiful. It's all original photography, and
he's a good photographer.
Yeah, and he's a good teacher. And so I encourage folks to check that presentation out. It's at our new office space that we just moved into this last week. So
is that new address on the website?
I don't know if it's on the website, but it's 18th and Sandy.
Sandy, right?
Yeah. And it's a really good space that's got we've been talking about fire. Our old building experienced a fire, and so Bark was displaced for a period of time. And we just moved into a new permanent place that has a great presentation area in the middle of it that we hope to host a lot more events, and we're having an office warming party, or I don't know, probably could come up with a more exciting name for it than that, but I believe that's on July 23rd. It's going to be our big hurrah. So we're going to have, but mark your calendars. It's going to be cool. We're going to have live music and artwork, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So
last time I went to one of Bark's big things like that, they had March 4th came walking through and playing their instruments.
Oh, cool!
Right towards the end of it, that was great. So whoever plans these really is got their finger on the pulse of what's going on here. So I kind of want to break away for a second and wonder if the guests for the second half. I don't see. I got a thumbs up. I guess we do. Okay, so we'll. And did you folks get that video that I was hoping to? All right, boy, these guys are on the ball. I'm gonna have to give them a raise. Of course, adding to nothing is still nothing. So anyway, any final words here that you might want to?
Final words. Get out to the forest and have fun, and and if you can, try to make it out to one of our events to learn more. And I hope to see you in the woods.
And go to the website, because a lot of what we said is going to go right by you. But if you go to the website, you'll be able to pick up on a lot of the different events and the things that are going on.